Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us as always to talk all things markets is University of Missouri Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
A light week for us today ahead of next week's busy schedule and busy week for reports. So as we get things started, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on the cattle side this week, if we start with cash cattle, they were basically unchanged on the week. On the feeder cattle side, we actually started the week early with steady to $3 higher feeder cattle prices, but as corn futures moved higher and feeder cattle futures moved lower, we ended the week 2 to 6 lower in some of those feeder cattle auctions this week. On the future side, the June live cattle futures contract closed down $3.50, and the May feeder cattle futures contract closed down $6.50. We did see strength in the box beef price this week. Choice box beef up about $7.50 on the week. We had strength across the board in all those subprimal components. That now puts that choice box beef price $42 above where it was a year ago at this time. I will remind us that we're comparing to the worst of COVID-19 when we talk about year ago levels. On the hog side, cash hogs this week, $2.40 higher this week. The June lean hog futures contract was also down this week pretty hard, down $7.30 on the week. The pork cutout value was up $1 this week. So strength in other components helped offset what were lower belly prices on the week.
And we definitely are getting into, and we'll notice this when we talk about those weekly slaughter numbers here shortly, the worst of the worst when it comes to disruptions from COVID-19. And again, I think highlights how incredibly resilient and impressive the rebound for agriculture has been over the last year. So let's talk those weekly slaughter numbers and take a closer look at those.
Yeah, for the week ending April 17th, USDA is estimating 640,000 head of cattle will be slaughtered this week. That's really unchanged relative to a week ago, down 1,000 head. But basically unchanged. On the hog side, 2.469 million head of hogs estimated for this week. That's 24,000 head more than a week ago. Just to give us a little bit of comparison relative to a year ago, cattle slaughtered is 154,000 head above a year ago. Hog slaughtered 230,000 head above year ago levels. If some remember us talking about year-to-date slaughter numbers for another point of reference, we were talking about hog slaughter that was 4% below year ago levels when we talked year-to-date. And just this week, we moved to minus 3.4%, 3.4% year-to-date. It just reminds me how quickly we will catch up on those year-to-date numbers as we continue to think about last year's COVID-19 slowdowns.
And then on the same side, I mean, really, the ability for us to catch up there as well. I mean, we were talking about backlogs for a long time, and then all of a sudden it seemed like we weren't anymore.
Yeah. So, and I think that's going to be important for us as we think about this year and we kind of get beyond the worst of the slowdown shutdown. We were pushing then really hard on slaughter. And I think you had processors who were certainly speeding up as much as they could those slaughter numbers on a weekly basis, trying to catch up. And so we're going to see some pretty big runs that I think as we look this year will be hard for us to compare to as we get further into to 2021 here.
All right, let's talk retail prices, and we are definitely continuing to see some strength there as well.
Yeah, that's right. You know, if we look at what we got for March this year relative to a year ago, we're talking about beef prices 7.2% higher. Talking about pork retail prices 8.3% higher. Now, I want to remind us that the worst of the very high retail prices are yet to come when we think about 2020, right? So when we were in the worst of COVID shutdown, we saw some big increases. So we also want to take these numbers with a little grain of salt. Just to look at some of the components, I will say your favorite bacon prices are up 11.3% for March of this year relative to a year ago, while steak prices up 10.5% relative to a year ago. And we are seeing, pork in particular, some of the strongest prices we've seen. There's only been a few months uh, historically where we've seen retail prices as high as we sit here in March of this year.
Talk to me a little bit about what this means on the consumer side of things. Does it also continue to stress the importance of economic recovery so that if prices are going higher, consumers are still able to purchase and our domestic demand doesn't fall off and stay strong as well?
Yeah, that's so all very good points being raised here, and I will say, we do need economic growth to continue. We are pushing relatively high prices for things like beef and pork to consumers. We sure don't want them to wake up one day and say, I can't afford this anymore. I think one of my concerns continues to be what happens as we continue to go through 2021. I'm beginning to see a number of products where we're getting a tick up in terms of prices. Are we going to see more inflation as we move forward? Are we going to continue to see costs associated with the pandemic create wider margins from farm to retail? And I do think we're seeing some of that still happening. So we don't want to shut off that demand side. Again, this is kind of I still think consumers are out there going, maybe we're beyond the worst of the pandemic. I'm happy to go out and have some really good food. Maybe that's a piece of steak with a slice of bacon on top of it. I don't really know what that's like for everyone, but if they no longer have money in their pockets for that, that could change things pretty rapidly as well.
For me, it's dim sum. Like you really couldn't do to go dim sum during the pandemic. It's a little hard to pick it up and go through the service as well. And I keep telling my husband, I'm like, that's like our first big meal when we go out somewhere.
Yes, and I think everybody's there, right? So I go, we don't want to forget this might be the strongest time here for a period, and I'm not suggesting then we fall off to something abysmal, but there's good strength right now in what we see. That likely doesn't continue forever, and there'll be some moderation.
I was muted this week. Let's talk consumer sentiment as we wind things down today.
We're going to have to start putting marks on the chalkboard about who has themselves muted in 2021. So another good consumer sentiment report out for April that we got today. The overall index for consumer sentiment up 1.9% relative to where we were in March. That's 20.5% higher than where we were a year ago. Really driven by the current economic conditions index. So for me, that's actually the big news out of consumer sentiment this week. So month over month, up 4.5% on that current situation, and they're almost 31% year over year. Those are some pretty impressive numbers, and continuing the recovery from the worst of COVID-19 is what we're seeing there. It's kind of like we had all of this COVID-19 issues, and now we're back to where we were. Now, I'm not saying we're out of COVID-19, but when you look at whether it's retail prices or consumer sentiment, you see the jagged ups and downs, but we've kind of gotten ourselves back on the same path, long-term path that we would have had pre-pandemic for many of the things that you and I talk about on a weekly basis.
It's nice to see feelings and sentiment about where we are continue to push higher.
And again, I look back and I go, it's just amazing how dynamic we've been in coming through all of the worst of that. It's almost like we haven't lost a beat. We faced the pandemic. We had a lot of issues. We handled many of those issues, and now it's like, back on track now. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. We'll see what the COVID-19 numbers look like as we go forward, but it's nice to be able to be talking about some positive news instead of how you and I spent much of our 2020.
Resilience is definitely going to, I think pivot was the word for 2020, right? So is resilience going to be our overused word for 2021?
I think there's going to be a lot of that goes on for a while. I just hope our word for 2021 is not inflation as we continue to go through the year.
All right, Scott, as we look ahead to next week, a busy week for us next Friday.
That's right. We start the week with cold storage and livestock slaughter on Tuesday, and next Friday we're going to get a cattle on feed report.
Sounds good. Always good to see you. Enjoy your spring weather. I hope you start to warm up as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And as you're headed into the tractor this spring, make sure to check out all of the great Brownfield podcasts at brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.